Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing session for the day. So yesterday I didn't open the question up for y'all, but then I put up the question in the Telegram group today in the morning itself. So we have a question in IR on Indo-Australia relationship. Okay. So before I read out the question, I want to mention few prerequisites that are important when you talk about an international relationship question. The prerequisites. Okay. This is not a normal international relationship question. For example, international relationship questions can be of different types. They could talk about broad issues like South-South cooperation or India's relationship with South Asia or Southeast Asia and so on. Also, they could talk about groupings or groupings like RCEP, TPP and so on. Sometimes the question is on certain world event. And this is a question on bilateral relationship. Bilateral relationship में Australia India relationship is not so important because we keep reading about India USA, India France, India Pakistan and so on. So this can be categorized as a semi-bouncer question, but otherwise in a bilateral relationship question you can usually expect questions with USA, Pakistan, China and so on. Okay, so this is a semi-bouncer question, and how do we handle this question? I'll read out the question for you all and then we will evolve subheadings to handle this question. What are the prerequisites when you handle a bilateral relationship based question? One is the usage of flashpoints. I'll tell you what I mean by flashpoints. By flashpoints, if you look at any bilateral relationship which India has, there are certain flashpoints which dot the trajectory of the growth of bilateral relationship. Like for example, take the case of India USA. What are the flashpoints that we have seen in the past 1 decade? There was 1 decade or more than 1 decade. There was civilian nuclear agreement and India's nuclear waiver that has been given to India. That was one. And the second and the most recent step is the cooperation these two countries are having in order to boost the renewable energy. That is one other flashpoint. And another important flashpoint is the cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. They both having a joint strategic vision of keeping this Indian Ocean region free of any external influence. That is actually a part of US pivot to Asia and so on. So there are certain flashpoints you can talk about when you look at any bilateral relationship, and it could be an economical flashpoint or a security based one or a disaster management based one or a defense based one. Like for example, India USA have also a strong defense cooperation these days, looking at the number of agreements that have been signed like LEMOA and SISMOVA. SISMOVA has become COMCASA in Indian context these days, but then there are certain levels in which these two countries are cooperating in defense sector, in co-production and so on. Okay, so that was about India USA relationship, and the example of India USA relationship has been taken to point out the important flashpoints that you could identify when you say a bilateral relationship. Similarly, when you take any other country, it is important to identify these key flashpoints, and using these key flashpoints you can write any answer when you write a question on in a bilateral relationship. That is very important. Uske alawa you should know about the certain facts like the trade value that is there, and then the trade deficit if any, and the movement of personnel and people. Like for example, India and Australia have a strong people to people cooperation in a manner of speaking, because India provides the third largest source of immigrants and the work and the skilled labor to Australia. Okay, so in this context an answer can be framed. So I'll read out the question for you all and we will see and evolve a structure for this answer in the usual lines of introduction, body and conclusion. Right. So Australia India relationship is an idea whose time has well and truly come. Comment. So this is the first part of the question, and suggest the required strategic measures to be taken by India at this juncture. So this question can be easily converted into a subparts. I definitely have to talk about the strategic measures or the measures as such, which are important to take forward this relationship between India and Australia. That is one thing that I definitely have to talk about. So how do I talk about the first part? The first part is telling me that there is a suitable environment in the world today which creates an opportunity for India-Australia relationship to flourish. You have to establish that. How do you establish that? by showing how the suitable environment exists, and to show that we have to evolve a side heading. What is the side heading? Something on the lines of time has come, and you have to give points under this basics in this basic subheading to tell the examiner that the suitable environment has evolved. Like for example, Chinese influence in this particular region of Indian Ocean region and so on can be countered by what? Quad grouping. Quad grouping में कौन कौन आता है? India and so on आते हैं, and it is important to include Australia as well, okay, and so on. So in this way you have to show that there are reasons why this relationship has to flourish, okay, that you can show. But these are the two basic subheadings. Even if you involve 4 or 5 points under each of them, you will still have space left. So how do you handle this question? You basically talk about the hurdles. You basically make a small hub and spoke diagram, and then you talk about the hurdles that are there, and that is going to increase the richness of your answer. It will add value to your answer. So conclusion is neither too generic or not too complicated. We will do it. And introduction, how do we start by introducing the answer? One is to talk about the general relationship which India and Australia have had. Also you could talk about certain events, okay. With respect to India and Australia, there aren't much events, like there are visits and so on, but visits are not so important because it is difficult for the examiner to link the visits until and unless it is a very big visit like PM Modi visiting these countries and so on. It is not useful if you use visits like high level ministerial delegations have moved from one country to another. That is not a good way to introduce your answer. So we'll start about by a summary, by summarizing the India-Australian relationship. That is a good way to start your answer. So we've evolved a structure for this answer. We've evolved 3 side headings, among which this and this is important. This is basically my value add addition material, okay. So I've done this. I've also talked to you all about the prerequisites. We will move forward and evolve a sample answer that has been written, okay. Let us see how this person starts his answer. He has basically started the summary approach or the definitional approach in a manner of speaking. India and Australia share the ideas of pluralism, liberal democracy, rule of law, Commonwealth traditions, etc. because both of them are members of Commonwealth. So India and Australia share this kind of relationship. This is basically a good introduction. Okay, that is one way you can introduce your answer. Now he is trying to point out how the suitable environment has emerged in the present socio-geopolitical environment, which provides an opportunity for India-Australia relationship to flourish. Let's see what points he has. To emerge as a net security provider in Indian Ocean region, which is basically one of the stated goals of India, okay. So in order for this to occur, we need Australia to tackle smuggling, privacy, etc. through joint patrol, joint cooperation, bilateral exercises and so on. So it is important, okay. By IOR he means Indian Ocean region. Write it fully, okay. You have to write these things fully, otherwise it can become difficult for the examiner to understand. IOR is still really easy to understand, but if you talk about SECA, which is basically comprehensive economic cooperation agreements, and you can't take it for granted that the examiner understands it immediately when you write it, okay. So try and write things completely, don't use acronyms. To counter rising Chinese influence in maritime arena, both countries need each other. Example, Quad. This is what we have been talking about. In order to decrease the Chinese influence in that area, and also the increasing pressure which China gives in the South China Sea to different countries, in order to overall balance the region, to emerge the idea of polarity, so these two countries have to coordinate with each other. India is the 3rd largest source of immigrants and skilled professionals to Australia. So the next step forward is to cooperate on this issue to improve service sector trade and skilling of our IT employees, so on. So basically he is telling you that there is movement of people to people between these two countries, especially from India to Australia. So you have to take this thing forward in order to increase the connect between these two countries on a people to people level, on an economic level, okay. So cooperation in trilateral engagements like RCEP can help these countries turn into flourishing trade zones. Australia is also a member of RCEP, by the way, but the sad part is India has pulled out of RCEP recently, and there are debates about renegotiating the terms of RCEP to make it lucrative to India and so on, which is a different issue. But then trilateral agreements like this, like this can help these two countries emerge as flourishing trade zones. So that is another suitable environment. And then further cooperation is only a natural continuation. So far he has told us the present situation which creates an opportunity for the flourishing of this relationship. Now he is telling you, he is hitting from a different angle. He is telling you that these two countries have cooperated at different levels in the past few years. So whatever way forward we have is basically a natural continuation of what we have done before. So what have we done before? We have taken up civil nuclear cooperation agreement, and then common goal of multipolarity, Australia's support to India's UNSC's right, UNSC's permanent membership rights, and then you have increasing cooperation in defense, education, etc. So these are the areas in which these two countries have cooperated so far, and it is only natural for these two countries to take this relationship forward for mutual benefit. Okay, so that is what he is trying to tell you. So these are very good points. He has given me 5 solid points, and under the 5 point he has given me the history, basically the different kinds of agreements and economic arrangements they have made so far. So this part is convincing. He has convinced me that there is a suitable environment for the relationship to flourish. Now let's see what he does. He is basically telling me what the hurdles are. So he is basically balancing out his answer. He has become very optimistic here. Usually when we write answers, we become negative in the first 2/3 of the answer, and then we balance it out by giving way forward, which is basically a positive step. In this context, he has become very wishful. He has become very positive in the first part of the answer, but he has to become a realist. In order to show that, he wants to be very practical, and he tells us that these are the problems that we have. One, we have the China factor. 2, large distance between them. This is basically analogous to the distance between India and Latin America, right? India and Latin America cannot have flourishing relationship, are not having flourishing relationship to a large extent. Why? Because of the distance. And the same applies for India and Australia, even if the distance is not as big as and when compared to India and Latin America. Let's see what he tells next. Deaths of Indians in Australia because of racism, hate, etc. So basically Indian diaspora is subjected to crimes in Australia because of several reasons he has pointed out. Okay, so these have to be handled properly, otherwise the trust between the people of one country and another will decrease. This does not bode well for a positive relationship between these two countries. What else do we have? Rising trade deficit, unfavorable to India. So basically the trade deficit isn't too much, but whatever trade deficit is there, it is unfavorable to India, so we cannot have it. So that has to be handled. That is another hurdle. And another hurdle is India pulling out of RCEP, which we have said, and then there is another agreement which is TPP, but India is not participating in TPP. So basically there are certain, if you do the reality check, there are certain problems in the flourishing of the relationship between these two countries. So you have to be smart and come up with a way forward. How do you take this movement forward? One is the cooperation on climate change. In the light of kelp forest degradation, bushfires in Australia, also barrier reef degradation. Great Barrier Reef is degrading because of global warming and so on. So basically Australia has its own set of problems because of global warming, and then India has its own set of problems like high temperatures, erratic monsoons, droughts, cloud bursts, and so on. So basically if you look at these two countries are quite prone to climate change, mostly because of the large coastline they have, and they are also linked by the Indian Ocean dipole, which is strictly which is basically affected by these ENSOs or the El Ninos and so on. So if climate change becomes a big factor, these two countries will definitely get impacted. So it is imperative, so it is necessary that these two countries create some kind of cooperation in order to make the climate agreement move forward. So they have to cooperate with each other on these lines. In fact, this question has been framed based on this particular topic, because there was an article which was talking about the bushfires in Australia. Around 15 million hectares of land in Australia has been subjected to bushfires, and then there were lots of animal loss, wildlife degradation, and so on. Because of all these things, the question of climate change has come up, because world over there has been an emerging consensus which is telling that the kelp forest degradation and the bushfires and the barrier reef degradation in Australia is mostly because of climate change. So in this context, what other country do we have in the vicinity of Australia which will face such problems? It is India. So these two countries have to cooperate. These two big countries in the region have to cooperate in order to sort the climate problem out. Okay. So finalizing SECA or Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement to improve trade. So basically this will help address the trade deficit in a manner of speaking. What are the provisions of SECA and etc.? It might be useful for prelims, but not so much for mains. So what else do we have? He's basically talking about the cooperation for Make in India by making use of Australian expertise and in health and education. Also, if you look at food processing, Australia has a very strong food processing sector. In fact, food processing is basically one of the major bastions of Australian manufacturing sector. So that being the case, it can provide an opportunity for synergy, because in India the food processing sector is still nascent, and secondly the perishability is very high. How high is the perishability? It is to the tune of 40 to 60% in vegetables and fruits, in a manner of speaking. So in this context, if we take help of Australia through technology transfer or through other international best practices or Australian best practices, we can improve our food processing sector, we can export, we can get foreign exchange and so on. All the assorted benefits will be there. Okay, so in this sector, these two countries will benefit each other. So what else does he have? So he basically has given 3 points, and these 3 are good points. One is the economic angle, the other is the climate angle, which was to be written in the context of the editorial that has come up, and then he is talking about Make in India and so on. So these are good points. Multi-pronged measures in political, social, economic and cultural arena are the need of the hour for mutual benefit. This is a decent conclusion. This is not a bad conclusion, because he's talked about political, social, economic and cultural arena. So this is a good conclusion. This is much better than the conclusion that we write, which is about taking above steps will solve the problems. So it is much better than that. So what else can be done? The answer is a really good answer. He has talked about the emerging environment, then he has talked about the problems, then he has talked about the measures that have to be taken forward. What else could have been done? In the 10-minute space, in a 7-minute space, this is a very good answer. In addition, he could have talked about security cooperation and how these two countries have to take that forward, especially in the maritime area, considering Chinese influence in these regions because of the string and pearl strategy, OBO or maritime silk route. All of these things are basically increasing Chinese influence in the region, and these two countries have to move forward to tackle this situation. Probably he didn't write a point on that because he already talked about it in the first subheading, because he is talking about Chinese influence here, so he probably didn't want to repeat the point. It is basically, if you tell them that you have to counter China, in order to counter China these two countries have to cooperate, he is basically repeating this point and he didn't want to do it. That seems to be the case. So it has been an overall good answer, and that should be the discussion for the day. Tomorrow's question has not been put up here. It's fine. I'll put it up again tomorrow in the morning itself, so you can answer it. So for the past 1 or 2 days, the systems have not been working. There are power issues and so on, which is why we have not been able to circulate the answer, circulate the question or the flyer. Give us 2 or 3 days. This problem will be eventually sorted. Okay. For now, I am basically putting out the question on the Telegram group. Okay. So thank you. I'll meet you tomorrow.